Hey everyone, my name's Alex Haney. Welcome to my channel. This is the place for queers to learn about the outdoors. And today is Tuesday again, and every Tuesday I do some kind of tutorial on backcountry travel. So it's the end of September now, and up here in Ontario where I live, it's getting a bit cooler, and I'm starting to prepare for some colder weather trips. So I've been thinking a lot about my packing lists for a trip coming up at the end of October, and I thought that I would do a video for you guys about some of the pros and cons of different insulation types to carry into the backcountry. So this information, most of it is just going to come from my own preferences and experience, but also a couple of tips from one of my favorite books by Andrew Skurka, The Ultimate Hiker's Gear Guide. Okay, the first option that I actually want to talk about is wool. And here is an example of a sweater that I often bring into the backcountry. This one is actually getting some holes and stuff in it, so I have to replace it. I guess that's the first thing I'll say, that the lifespan of wool depends on how you treat it. I tend to wear wool a lot when I'm doing really trips where I'm making a lot of fires and stuff like that, and where I'm going and gathering a lot of wood and stuff, so I'm a lot rougher on my wool stuff than I am on any other type of fabric, so it does tend to wear out quicker on me. But from what I've learned from other people and from Andrew Skurka is that the lifespan of a decent quality wool versus the synthetic fleece is about the same. Like, one of the main reasons that I would choose wool is because it's the best option if you're going to be making a lot of fires and sitting around a fire a lot, because it's actually fire resistant, so you can have like sparks coming at you and it's like you're wearing a fire suit. It's really cool. It'll just like kind of sizzle out, but I've never had anything burn through my wool, so I can, you know, be right in there in the fire and I don't even have to worry about anything. It's really great for that. The downside to wool for me is that it's not very compressible, but that's kind of a con of fleece as well. They don't really compress down, so they're kind of bulky, so if you need to be thinking about that, it's not the greatest. Another thing about wool is that I'm not a huge fan of how it handles moisture. If it's going to be a super wet trip, even if I'm making fires, I'd probably rather bring fleece. Wool tends to just like soak up the moisture. It like soaks into the wool fibers. That's heavy when you're wearing it, it's heavy to carry it. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but if weight is a huge issue, then I probably wouldn't go with wool. I'd go with something else and just be a bit more careful around the fire, or maybe opt out of having a fire. I'd say that compared to fleece, it's just about as warm with the same weight of fabric. Price, compared to other things, wool is more expensive than fleece by far. If you're going to be buying wool new, it's quite expensive. Like, it's up there on the list of most expensive stuff to buy new. But at the same time, I have never had to buy a new wool sweater for the backcountry. I just go to the thrift store and there's tons of them usually. If you guys are interested in learning more about how to thrift for outdoor stuff, by the way, I have a video that I'll link up here that you can check out. It has lots of good tips for that. So here's an example of something I would take in really cold weather. This is like a thick weight wool sweater. And like I said, it's pretty heavy and pretty bulky, but it's pretty warm and it handles fire great. So those are the pros for me. Next thing we'll talk about is fleece. So this is an example of a medium weight fleece sweater. And one of the great things about fleece is that there's just an insane abundance of it, and it's super cheap. Like, even if you want to buy it brand new, you can get it for a really affordable price, but at the same time, every single thrift store I've ever been to is just loaded with fleece for super cheap. Like, I think I paid $2 for this. Anytime I have a friend who's new to the backcountry, I always recommend them to get fleece because it's pretty great. The only downside to me is how it handles fire. I especially love the way that fleece handles moisture as compared to wool. If I was going on any kind of trip where there's going to be a lot of moisture or rain or anything like that, I definitely wouldn't carry my wool. I would bring fleece. Even if I was going to be making a lot of fires, I'd probably just try to be more careful around the fires, because what would happen is it would just end up burning a little hole if you got a spark, because it's basically plastic. So, but at the same time, compared to wool, which tends to soak up the moisture, I really like the way it handles wetness. It just kind of sits on the outside of it, doesn't soak through, so it doesn't make it heavier or anything like that. It's about as bulky as wool is, but I find it a bit lighter. Okay, so here's an example of a heavyweight fleece that I would maybe bring winter camping. Depending on how I'm traveling, winter traveling, I usually would prefer to bring wool because I like to make fires and work with fire and stuff like that. So the next type of insulation type that I'm going to be talking about with you guys are these puffy style of insulation that can either be filled with down or some type of synthetic material. Now, I don't have really much experience at all with the synthetic fillers for these types of jackets. I pretty much have only used down, but what I'll do is I'll tell you about my experience, some of the pros and cons of down, and then I'll also touch a bit on some of the stuff I've heard from other people about the synthetic fillers as opposed to the down. The number one difference is price. Down is quite expensive. It's up there with wool, sometimes even more expensive than wool. The other thing about it is it's pretty hard to find at thrift stores. I think because it's so expensive, where I am, I have a hard time finding it used. It takes a bit more effort. Though the good thing about that though is that down filler lasts a lot longer with proper care than synthetic stuff does. At least that's what I've heard. So, you know, with proper care, these can last decades. The other thing is that down is a lot lighter than all the other options. So I think it's something like it's 50% warmer for the weight than either the fleece or the wool. Here's my big winter parka for winter, deep cold winter camping. One of the other great things about it that you'll notice is that a huge thing of down can just compress down to nothing. It's really, really great if you have if you are worried about bulk and weight. It's like the best option for that. I have a synthetic fill winter sleeping bag. It's a lot heavier and bulkier than any of my down stuff. Another thing that I should mention about the price of down is that it really depends on the fill quality. So you'll have different numbers associated with down, like you'll see 600 fill, 800 fill. The higher that number, then the higher quality it is, and the warmer it will keep you. And it will also be more expensive, obviously. Yeah, the huge downside to down is that it's the worst in wet weather. You really don't want to get down wet. So if you're doing like a trip where there's gonna be a lot of rain or anything like that, it's probably your worst choice. The synthetic fill for the puffies is a lot better for that. Another thing about the synthetic fill that Andrew Skirka mentions in his book is that it has the worst lifespan of any of these options. So while it is cheaper than the down and it handles moisture better, it won't last very long, it doesn't compress, it's heavier, all that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. That's kind of why I don't have any of the synthetic fill insulations, because I feel like with these three options, with the fleece or wool or down, I'm pretty well covered for anything that I'm going to encounter. Anyway, I hope you guys found this video helpful. Remember, I do these videos every week, so if you're not subscribed yet, click that subscribe button down below, and I'll see you again on Thursday with another episode of my solo Nipissing River trip, and I'll see you on Tuesday for another backcountry tutorial. Bye guys.